Greetings. Welcome back to Trinity Place in Geneva, New York. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is a sermon for the 8th Sunday of Pentecost season, and we follow the Revised Common Lectionary. So the readings for today are Luke, Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, 13 through 21, which I'll be talking about, and Hosea 11, 1 through 11, which I'll mention, and also an excerpt from Aurora Light by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, which I'll also mention. Now, as people here know, I had kind of a traumatic event in May. The surgery that I had to fix my back was followed almost immediately, within 3 days, by an emergency surgery to remove a blood clot on my spine. Well, like so many people do, I spent an eternity in the emergency room before I was diagnosed and treated. I was in what I can only been able to describe as a kind of a cocoon of pain. Thankfully, I recovered and I'm doing great now, but the reason I mention this is because, like many such events in people's lives, it was a forceful hitting of the pause button. Kind of like hitting Alt-Delete on your PC or Command-Delete on your Mac. It kind of cleared everything else before it and left an empty space within which to hold an unadorned view of life for a little bit. All of us have likely had those kind of moments and experiences, not always from trauma, thankfully. Hiking and camping can do that. Loss and grief, of course. Self-imposed deprivation. There are times when we clear the space in the field all around us and within our hearts and within our minds, or have it cleared for us. When that happens, we suddenly see things anew, or from a different angle, or from underneath, or from looking down as if from above. I think that's what Jesus was trying to do with this proverbial saying and in his follow-up parable that we heard this morning in that reading from Luke, which was to clear the space within and around those who were listening. Now, since Jesus issued that warning so many years, millennium ago, much has grown up in the world around us like weeds and undergrowth, crowding out his words and making them seem, kind of unrealistic, kind of impractical, sort of pie in the sky. But we know in our heart of hearts that his warnings are wise. And every once in a while, the space within and around us gets cleared and we hear him again. Jesus says 3 things in this gospel that we might want to pay attention to. First, in response to someone who's complaining about his stingy brother, he says, watch out. Watch out. Guard against greed. Watch out, guard against greed. Secondly, with his parable, he warns that an abundance of possessions does not create an abundance of joy. An abundance of possessions doesn't create an abundance of joy. And third, which seems like a kind of a background upon which his parable is told, he reminds us that security is an illusion. First, watch out for greed. Secondly, money can't buy you joy. And third, there is no such thing as security. With those 3 simple, pithy points, we're suddenly at the front door of spiritual wisdom. If we take any of this gospel stuff seriously at all, then we need to approach this subject with gentleness and reverence rather than scolding, shaming, or guilt. You see, all of us live in a house of cards created by our life within the kingdom of stuff. So let us proceed with a sense of our own fragileness here. This Greek word for greed is translated into English as the yearning to have more, the yearning to have more. So when Jesus issues his warning, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for life is about more than the abundance of possessions, he seems to say. He's warning us about the hazards of our always yearning for more. Guard against it, he says. He doesn't say don't feel it. That would be silly, because we yearn from our very first moment of hunger at birth, and we don't stop yearning until we can't breathe anymore. Guard against it, he says. He gives no rule or plumb line by which to measure greed. He simply says, hey, this is real, so pay attention to it. I wonder what he would say in our world. In 2022, every strand of electronic data that swirls around us in radio waves and optic cables and Wi-Fi, even filling up every visual void on billboards and cereal boxes, is charged with a highly sophisticated effort to excite our greed and to seduce our desire, or to seduce our yearning for more. We're invited We're invited to be perpetually dissatisfied. Think about that for a moment. We are urged from every direction to be perpetually dissatisfied. We're taught to be chronically hungry. Our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities are taunted and teased. We're titillated constantly by the hawkers of more, and they are very good at their trade. Watch out, Jesus warns. Guard against your greed. So how do we do that? Well, in the midst of our yearnings, if we can remember the difference between joy and happiness, we can guard against greed. Happiness, as I've said before, is something that we can manufacture or momentarily create for ourselves. But joy is something that we must be open to and allow its visitation when it comes along. We don't create joy. It happens. We know how to make ourselves happy when we need to pick me up. For me, I take a bike ride. It makes me happy. For someone else, it might be a walk. Calling a friend, dark chocolate. Some people shop to make themselves happy. Others drink a beer. We can make ourselves happy with things that we do. But there is nothing we can do to make joy. We get visited by joy. It happens sometimes when we least expect it. Driving down the highway and suddenly we're filled with a sense of calm serenity that we didn't invite or invent. Or we're with a friend or a lover, and what was at one moment a normal conversation suddenly becomes a joyful intimacy that we did not invite or invent. Joy visits us, but we must be open to it. We must be predisposed to be taken over by it when it arrives and not try to clutch it and keep hold of it when it leaves. Of course, we will yearn for more of it once it passes. But we smile and let it go and think, that was nice. A simple moment of gratitude at the other end of joy rather than a fretful trying to hold on to it or clasp it. The way we live without greed or live with our greed, or in spite of our yearning for more, is a deep and pervasive presence of mind that an abundant life is discovered and sustained with joy rather than happiness. It turns out that an abundant life is not about a capacity to take the next breath or to keep the heart beating just a little bit longer. Abundant life is not about what we come to own or to achieve. Rather, like joy, abundant life is measured in what we see and know rather than what we have and do. And so, in this, we are now at the nexus of Jesus and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Earth crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only those who see take off their shoes. The rest sit around it and pluck blackberries. The presence of mind to know that abundant life is about joy. That has to do with what we see when we look around. Most of us, most of the time, see and touch the life that surrounds us as if it is an object for our use. Instead of being awed by how crammed full everything is with the Holy Presence, we see things as an object for our consumption or our ownership. We measure it and value it by whether or not it tastes good to us or how much we want to have it to own for ourselves. In so doing, we deaden our sense of holiness that pervades everything. The magnificence of an apple becomes its sweet taste, something that satisfies our yearning. The sensual beauty of an orange becomes a vehicle for vitamin C. A tree becomes a house, a forest becomes a park, a person becomes a clerk, a cow becomes a steak. I do not mean that we should deny the utility of things nor the certainty of our basic needs, but must our need and their utility transform the holiness of that life into an object for our use. The way we guard against greed is to keep a presence of mind about the holiness of life. The bush is crammed with God, not because the blackberries taste good to us, but because it is infused with God. We are infused with God. All that we see and seek to possess, all that we yearn to own, all of that we desire to consume, it is all crammed with God. Keeping a presence of mind about the holiness of life, while surrounded on all sides by messages about the utility of life and the objectification of all creatures, will help us to guard against greed. That's all we need do, Jesus said. Guard against it. We need not be immune to greed, but on guard with a presence of mind that the sacred is hiding in plain sight all around us. Now, the last of Jesus' 3 points on the punchline of his parable about the foolish farmer is that security, more is the pity, is an illusion. It's a fascinating little story. Jesus does not critique the farmer's wealth. He does not critique the man's good fortune. There's no hint of a critique of the farmer being a type A, goal-oriented person. The critique is that the farmer confuses safety with security. The mistake is in imagining that there comes a time when we will be safe because we have achieved something or arrived at something or created a particular lifestyle for ourselves and all will be well. But there is no such thing as safety. Naturally, we spend a lot of time and energy trying to figure out how to be safe, and such precautions allow us to then pretend that we are safe. But Jesus' point is that in spite of our best efforts, we are always vulnerable. A better diet, a safer neighborhood, nicer school, bigger income, giant SUV. None of those things, none of them will make us safe. We are vulnerable to all the ravages of life, period. Our sense of security in life should not be derived from how safe we think we are, because sooner or later, that safety will be revealed as an illusion. Our security must come instead from something or somewhere else. In the storms that swirl around us, whether it is a personal crisis of grief, or whether it is experience of trauma in an emergency room, or in the midst of social and political chaos, where are we centered? If the gospel is to be believed, at our center, at our core, is a common bush of fire, a fire with God. True. At the very core of your body, at my core, at the nexus between the heart and the mind, we are crammed with heaven. We are crammed with the presence of God. And if we know that, if we really know it, then we'll be secure in any storm. And don't get me wrong, we may not be safe. We may even perish. But if we know at our core that we are crammed full of God, we will have perished with an awesome sense of security. Guard against greed. An abundant life built upon openness to joy more than making ourselves happy with stuff. And the security of knowing that we too are crammed with God. All of it's just some more subversive wisdom from the rabbi who lives at the center of our tradition. Thank you. I'm grateful that you're here with us. Amen.